I mean,
Carry on.
there is literally a chapter in this book called Trust Yourself, Not Your Doctor. And then she had the audacity, and I will get into this when we talk more closely about the confirmation hearings, where she says over and over and over again in this hearing, like it is the main, like that's her main thing that she goes back to is, oh, every patient should have the opportunity to discuss with their doctor, which like, there's a lot of people who don't have access to a doctor, so that's terrible. Also, your very, very popular book says trust yourself, not your doctor. So, I mean, forgive me if I'm not super convinced, okay?
Hey there, fellow nerds. Welcome to another episode of The Present Illness, your absolute favorite podcast. This is the podcast where two physicians try to make sense of a very hard to understand world that is increasingly sick at all times, it seems. It's like a one-way road that we're on, just getting worse and worse. Anyway, I'm Arghavan Salles, a surgeon scientist and your friendly neighborhood doom scroller in residence.
Well, I hope this doesn't become a palliative care situation. I'm Alyssa Burgart, an anesthesiologist and bioethicist who tracks news and health law like they're EKGs full of spikes and surprises. The Present Illness is where we dig into public health, politics, culture, and ethics with a scalpel in one hand and a meme in the other.
Yeah, I might need CPR any minute now. But anyway, big thanks to everyone listening. Extra love, as always, to anyone who's a subscriber or follower on any of the various platforms. And a special warm welcome to anyone who just stumbled in from hearing about the firing of Kristi Noem, who's a big friend of dogs.
Famous dog killer.
Correct.
Kristi Noem. This makes me think of something. So I know she just got fired. We're recording this on Thursday, March 5th. Kristi Noem was just fired. She'll be replaced by someone else we'll talk about later. Mark Wayne Mullen. I was talking to a friend of mine in town who's a veterinarian. So I got an email from the vet's office saying, we want you to get your animals vaccinated against rabies before they have any elective procedures. Like it's a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
We're happy to do it during the procedure. And so I texted her because she's our family friend. And I was like, are people not vaccinating their dogs? And she was like, or their cats. She's like, we're seeing this like huge rise in anti-vaccine sentiment for people around their animals. And when I think about Kristi Noem and I think about anti-vax dog families and cat families, I just think I feel like everyone needs to watch Old Yeller, which I know has really traumatized multiple generations with the beloved dog who gets rabies and then has to be shot. But I feel like there's a real cultural connection there that, maybe it's time to get back to that. I don't know.
I don't think you're too far off there. I have seen people talking about not wanting their dogs to get autism. That's been a thing, I guess, that's out there. I mean, we know that vaccines don't cause autisms in humans, but and they also don't cause autism in dogs. But
can dogs have autism?
I don't know.
I'm not familiar with that diagnosis.
But even if they did, not a reason to allow your dog to be vulnerable to something like rabies that would lead to their death.
Yeah, and can make, humans really, there's no treatment for rabies.
Yeah.
Once you get it, it's bad. It's bad.
Yeah.
Anywho, listen, folks, we're glad you're here. We feel pretty confident that listeners of this show do not need to watch Old Yeller again. I personally was traumatized by it as a child. We do, however, just as a note to new listeners, we do tend to talk about topics that can be intense. They can be a lot. So if you're listening to this with your little ones, you maybe want to pop in some headphones. And if you need to sit this one out, we totally get it. So there's been so much that's happened in the news since you and I spoke last.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can't possibly cover it all, but I thought I would just touch on a couple of things. So one, we talk about the Epstein files on here a lot because we care about human beings not being abused and we care about people in power not being able to do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hillary Clinton has been deposed on the Epstein files. So I can put a link to that if people would like to watch it. Did you watch it?
I watched the clips that came out afterwards. So she was deposed and Bill was deposed, I believe, the next day. What has been fascinating to me about seeing the clips is how many people online were like, where was this Hillary in 2016? She was right there. She was right there every single day doing as much as she could flying all over the country, getting pneumonia, doing everything she could to prove that she was the most qualified person for that job. And you all decided that her pantsuits were annoying and her email server was the biggest catastrophe ever. And I hope you all feel like fools in retrospect looking at what we got instead. But what really was remarkable to me about all these people, I mean, it was a lot of people. Like, oh, we made such a mistake. Yes. And I knew it on November 9th of 2016. How are you only 10 years later coming to this conclusion? You are such a part of the problem. But better late than never, I guess. But anyway, so what really struck me though was all these people who don't understand their own sexism enough to understand that they appreciate the exact same behavior that she's demonstrating now. They appreciate it now because she's not aspiring to power. And that same behavior was what they despised about her and made her unlikable or whatever back in 2015 and 2016. And that is exactly why we don't have Kamala Harris as president, and we will not likely have a woman as president anytime soon. I have like completely given up any hope that that's going to happen because people can't even recognize these patterns in themselves.
Well, this is like the comment when people are like, well, we're not, Americans aren't ready for a woman president. No kidding. I mean, that is clear. That is clear. It's too scary having those ladies.
Yeah,
Um,
ladies with opinions who can speak clearly and coherently and not just try to violate every law possible at every turn. I will say, though, for people, and again, I don't think you have to agree with everything Hillary says or believes to
no,
understand that she's a
I think you can hate
super
the
competent.
Clintons for like, there's a lot of reasons why people in power for lots of reasons where you're going to be like, I don't, whatever.
Yeah. But I don't think you can deny that she is competent. And I don't think you can deny that she had a plan for everything that was possible. People talked about her being over prepared. Anyway, all that to say,
Can you
I hope
imagine what it would be like to be an over prepared president right now? That'd be awesome. I would love that.
I would certainly love that rather than
Wow.
one who's like, I don't know, why do we go to war? Well, I don't know. Today's reason is let me spin the wheel and see what I tell you today. Tomorrow will be different. Maybe this afternoon will be different. But at this very moment, what's coming to my mind is spin a wheel and whatever, pin the tail on the donkey, whatever it is. Anyway, so what I'm hoping though is that Hillary saw some of that. I hope that she saw the reaction. I hope she saw that people really do appreciate her. I hope it didn't make her upset about why they didn't appreciate her the way they should have in 2015 and 2016. I know it made me upset. It made me, for a second, think what we might look like, what the United States might look like today in 2026 if all these people had had this realization in 2015. For a second, to dream. I mean, think about that. Think about a world without Trump won.
The fan fiction writes itself.
It's just incredible. It's just incredible. And then I got immediately angry. I started thinking about that for a moment, and then I got immediately angry at what we could have had and didn't because of misogyny in this country. Anyway, yes, so I did watch some clips.
Well, I mean, speaking of misogyny, I thought we could also talk about another presidential hopeful who's been in the news lately, which is Gavin Newsom
Oh,
from
fantastic.
our state of California. Newsom did an interview at the end of February, which has like since picked up, people have picked up on some terrible things that he said. And the shit eating grin on this man's face as he talks about how it's totally fine. And in fact, a demand of the Democratic Party to be more, quote, culturally normal by not making sure to prioritize the needs and values of people who are trans in this country. So, apparently felt really good about just stomping on their rights, really minimized the things that trans people are going through in this country by saying, like, well, Democrats really need to not focus on things like pronouns. Actually, I could play a clip. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, please.
So this is Gavin Newsom responding to, he has just made a comment on how he was way out ahead on gay marriage and how he really got hammered because of that. And Obama didn't want to talk to him or be on camera with him or something. And, you know, rather than thinking he should push for justice, this is his response.
For another athlete to succeed. And I said that and I believe that. And it's not out of an indictment to the trans community, quite the contrary, and a record that can back that up, a record that is, that I'm attacked for my advocacy for the community. But I do think it's a very different issue.
But and
Use
so
that words.
it's a different issue. And what lesson do you take from that as somebody who's trying to make sure that Democrats, maybe even you, win?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a tactical
Yeah.
perspective, from the prism of purely politics, um, there's no doubt that the Democratic Party needs to be, dare I say, more culturally normal. I believe that. Um, Less prone to spending disproportionate amount of time on pronouns, identity, politics. More focused on tabletop issues, things that really matter, the stacking of stress in terms of electricity bills and childcare costs and health care and obviously housing costs, and how easily we get trapped in that, and how I've fallen prey to that. I mean, here I was, way out front on marriage equality. So I understand this from both on the receiving end of this and on the front end of this, leading the pack. So I think there has to be some consideration of that.
The shit-eating grin on his face when he's like, "Well, I know how hard it is because, if you come out too early to care about people's human rights, you can't win elections." I mean, fuck you, Gavin Newsom.
That okay.
So
It's so
so
upsetting
yeah,
because
and like as though the main issues that are concerning for trans people are pronouns, which yes, it's important, I think, Gavin, that, people use the language that people want to be referred to, but like that is not the main problems being faced by trans people. They're being murdered. They're
well,
being dismissed. They're being told that they're not who they are. I mean, it's just
well, and their
infuriating.
access to healthcare is being revoked, and also we have that whole thing. Was it Kansas? I didn't prep for this topic, but I think it was Kansas where they announced that
Yes.
in a couple of days, their driver's license was going to be invalidated. So if you were a trans person living there, there was no grace period. There was no like implementation of this that was thoughtful. It was just one day you were going to wake up and your driver's license was no longer valid and you weren't going to be able to get to work.
Well, it's not just, it's that people woke up, they received a letter in the mail that said your license is already invalid.
Oh, I thought it
It
was like
was
as of like whatever Thursday of whatever week it was.
they by the time people received these letters, their licenses were already revoked. So, and obviously it's not about trying to improve access or trying to rectify some documentation thing that is no longer in alignment with the state of Kansas. I mean, because they absolutely could have just sent people new driver's licenses, but they didn't do that. So, how is it that somebody is supposed to drive? And Kansas is a big place. I grew up getting to drive to Kansas because that's where my great grandparents lived. There's like a lot of fields there. It is a lot of parts of Kansas are incredibly rural. And so, like, where are you supposed to get a ride to go get your license renewed because now you have an invalid license. And so if you're caught driving with an invalid license in Kansas, I don't see that going well either.
Well, and I agree. And the whole premise of it, right, is that if you are a trans person, the reason they're invalidating your license is they want you to go back and get a new license that has the sex assigned to you at birth. So then you're going to have people who are femme presenting who will have a driver's license that says they're male. And there will be people who are masculine presenting who will have a driver's license that says they're female, which is going to create not only discordance for people to have to carry these identity cards that don't match who they are, but also like imagine you get pulled over and someone's like looking at the license and looking at you and looking at the license and looking at you. Like they're going to have to go through that experience every time they have to show their license for something. And of course, your driver's license isn't just for driving. We use a license, you go to pick up medication at the pharmacy. I mean, there's all sorts of
Well,
times. Go
and
to
what
the
will
bank
happen
to pull out
and
money.
what will happen is those individuals will be accused of either stealing their license or they will be seen for being trans people, and there will absolutely be people who have power and authority, whether that is through appointment through the state or it is just simply vigilantism, who will commit violence on
Yes.
people because of that disconnect, which
Yes, absolutely. It's endangering trans people's lives. And he sits there and acts as though sports is the only thing that matters. I mean, we have literally hospitals all over the country that have cut back on gender affirming care because that is what the federal government has demanded of them.
and they're
And
coming for adult care next.
And yeah, and he's sitting there talking about sports, which not to say that sports isn't important also, but compared to these issues that are affecting many more people, there's a very small number of trans athletes. And just to be clear, I think you and I both agree they should be allowed to play sports, and that is appropriate for their gender, not their sex assigned at birth. Um,
Well, and
and
this the whole
these other
sports
issues affect many more people than just the sports
well,
issue.
and the trans athletes and sports issue is a issue that was manufactured
Yeah.
by the right in order to make it so that people have these conversations. You know where he got this? One of the things that he talked about right before this in that interview was how he had Charlie Kirk on his podcast. Newsom had Charlie Kirk on his podcast and asked, oh, how is it that you motivated so many young men to vote? And I mean, this is the kind of stuff that he was talking about. So it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, go ahead and scapegoat an entire community, an already deeply marginalized and traumatized community, and go ahead and actually just say that they don't matter. Go fuck yourself, Gavin Newsom. That's my opinion.
Well, and I think that's one of the first things he did with his podcast, if I recall correctly, that he launched a year ago. Either his first or his second episode was this same nonsense. And it was like, obviously, people who live in California, we already know that he's got a lot of flaws, like throwing people off of homeless encampments, for example, is just horrific from a humanitarian perspective. Um, but then to have that be like one of the first things that you talk about when you're chasing votes based on what you think people want you to say, it's never going to work. People see that that's not authentic, and I don't, I don't see him honestly having a successful run. Yes, he has a nice smile and as you've said before, nice hair, whatever, and that will take him far. But I think this is disingenuous, it seems to me, what he's doing now.
Well,
He's
it's
just
also
trying to
really
what voters want.
It's also stupid because there's so many people who don't vote, and there's so many Democrats who didn't vote in the last election because they didn't feel that they were being represented, whatever. And so the idea that the way to get the vote is to court the people that the other side was
Yeah.
able to mobilize in the past is like, you've been a politician for a long time, Gavin. I feel like you should know better. You
Yeah,
should know
yeah,
better.
I agree. I also don't think it's a successful strategy. I just think that's what he's trying to do, and I think it's gonna fail on multiple fronts,
Well,
but
and the idea that we should be, quote, culturally normal and that cultural normalcy is to dismiss the needs of citizens in this country, to throw them under the bus. Fuck that. I don't want to be normal if that's what normal means.
yeah,
No
and
thanks.
also that's not I mean, you could say a lot of things about Democratic Party, and we have and we will again, but that's not what that party is about. I mean, if we wanna be in a party that ignores large swaths of the country, then we can go be Republicans. Like, that's who's served by that. I mean, that's not I think he's got a very fundamental misunderstanding of what a lot of voters in the Democratic Party are looking for.
Yeah. Well, here we are.
Yeah.
Anyway, none of that, Arghavan, is what we had planned on talking about, but we have so many thoughts. We have so many thoughts. So, we are really excited to get in today's episode, and I will tell you, we were wildly unprepared for how much news would be released and how many, like, wild things would happen since Arghavan and I talked last week. Because we talk a lot, you guys. Like, we talk a lot. And so so this week, we're actually gonna have such a long episodes. The first part is gonna focus on Iran, and the war that has broken out since Arghavan and I spoke last week. And then the second part of this is gonna focus entirely on Casey Means and her Senate confirmation hearing. So I know, and you know, and I'm sure that many of our listeners know that shortly after, just a few days after we recorded our last episode, Trump was like, "I'm just going to go ahead and bomb Iran."
Yeah.
So I was hoping that you might give us an Iran update because you are our Iran expert on this show. It's not
The
me.
Iran correspondent.
You are the Iran correspondent of the present illness.
um, yeah. So, for folks who don't know, I was born in Iran and left when I was quite young. Have been back multiple times. Still have family in Iran, and I say that just to position myself. I didn't grow up there, and I don't pretend to be an Iranian who lives in Iran. Right? Like I live in California. I have for a long, long time. And I pay close attention to what Iranians are saying on social media, and of course, what we're hearing from family, what we hear from Iranian news sources, not meaning Iranian state media, but other news sources that are run by Iranians that cover what's happening in Iran. Um, and so what's really challenging, I think, in this moment, well, there's multiple things that are really challenging. One is the internet, again, has been shut down in Iran as it was in January, and that's been since Saturday midday. And so we're already almost a week into almost complete internet shutdown, which is really problematic for many reasons, one of which is, these kind of evacuation notices that Israel is putting out there. It's very hard for people to get those notices. There's not a national emergency response type system where they're getting anything pushed to their phones to tell them about those kinds of alerts. So that's extremely problematic. People can't coordinate with each other for, say, leaving specific areas. I mean, we've seen Tehran, for example, the capital is a major bombing site from, US, Israel, whoever, it's a combined effort. Um, and so some people have left. I think a lot of people, from what I'm hearing from folks there, a lot of people have left Tehran, at least temporarily. I don't know how long they'll be able to stay away, but also they're bombing all over the country. Many will have heard about the school in Minab that was bombed on Saturday. That was one of the first places that was bombed by the U.S. and Israel. Um, there has been some controversy, I'll just point out around that, with some folks, particularly Iranian folks, thinking that Iran did that the Islamic Republic Guard Corps was responsible for that bombing. Obviously, we don't totally know, but I don't think that's what the majority of the evidence suggests. The majority of the evidence suggests it was the U.S., and the reason is likely that it was in proximity to a previous IRGC military base, and most likely it was just imprecise, is my guess. But the U.S. has not owned that. Israel has said they didn't do it, but the U.S. has not quite owned that yet. Karen Levin has been asked about it and, punted as she always does. Yeah. Um, but there had been video of like a failed Iranian missile that you see kind of falling to the ground, but that wasn't actually there. That was in a town far away from there. So that's, I think, what caused the initial confusion. And of course, we know that the Iranian government has no qualms about harming its own people and, has previously poisoned schoolgirls. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they would have done that, or even that they would have done that to create some sympathy for Iranians, to blame the US and Israel. None of that is out of the realm of possibility, but it doesn't seem, at where we sit today, Thursday, March 5th, based on what I've seen, my personal assessment is that probably was the US missiles that did that. But there continues to be some cloudiness around that specific
Sure.
location. We've seen, or many of us at least have seen overhead photos of the graves that they dug for these victims of that casualty, whoever launched those missiles. New York Times is saying 175 people dead, which is pretty similar to other figures I've seen, 183 maybe, somewhere in there, most of them being children. And so
Yeah.
there's these overhead images of just serial graves being dug row after row. Obviously, that's heartbreaking, whoever did it, and there's no excuse for targeting a school and killing children. Um, and one thing that a lot of Iranians have pointed out online is that a lot of the people, mostly Americans, US citizens, I should say, who are really upset about these children having been bombed, had nothing to say about the tens of thousands who were murdered in Iran by the Iranian government in January. And I think that's hard for us to see, not because we don't care about those children. Obviously, we care about those children. And over 200 children were killed in the streets of Iran in January by our own government, along with 40,000, 50,000, we don't know the exact numbers, but tens of thousands of mostly young Iranians. And people were largely silent. And I think that's just hard for us to see, that those huge numbers of people were murdered and mostly people looked away. And now, because the US has some involvement, people are acting like they care about these 200-ish children. And maybe they do really care, but what about everyone else? Or what about if we go back to 2022 and the hundreds of people the IRGC killed and the Besiege killed as part of the Women Life Freedom protest? What about the executions? Iran executes more people than I believe any other country. And therefore, one of the common charges for these protesters is, like we've talked about before, crimes against God, just because you protested the Islamic Republic, and the head of the Islamic Republic is a representative of God, then by protesting, you have committed a crime. I mean, one of the IRGC leaders was on TV in Iran. I just saw this video this morning threatening parents about their children's behavior, that if they say anything, anyone who says anything against the IRGC or is in alignment with the so-called enemy, which is either US or Israel, will be executed. I mean, this is the kind of regime that we're working with. And so I say all that to say there's a lot of anti-war sentiment that I see in the US and online, and that makes perfect sense. Like this, let's just be clear, this war is illegal. The US government, Hegseth, Rubio, the president, the vice president, they've given many shifting explanations for why they decided to bomb Iran. You know, they've said, well, because they were going to get a nuclear weapon within 2 weeks, which, by the way, Netanyahu has been saying about Iran since the 1990s. You can go watch the clips. It didn't happen, obviously. That was like 30 years, not 2 weeks. So that's one explanation that's been given. Another has been, but because we want to have regime change in Iran. Another has been, we want to help the people of Iran achieve democracy. Another has been, that Rubio said actually was that, well, Israel was going to strike Iran, and then Iran would have retaliated against the U.S. So we needed to preemptively strike before Israel strike so that Iran wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? Like ridiculous. To speak to that point, just real quick, a member of the military went to protest this yesterday, saying we don't want to die for Israel. We are U.S. military. You know, we gave up we're willing to die for the U.S., but we're not here to die for Israel. And he was at a senator's office, and the senator and the security forces there in the senator's office broke this man's arm, a U.S. service member. Anyway, so there's been lots of different reasons. The most interesting, perhaps, to you and me and our audience, I don't know if you saw this. I'm just going to read you a quote that came from military folks, is that their commander, so this is one person says that their commander opened up the combat readiness status briefing by urging us not be afraid as to what is happening with our combat operations in Iran right now. He urged us to tell our troops that this was all part of God's divine plan, referencing numerous citations from the Bible, referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. He said that, quote, President Trump has been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth. He had a big grin on his face when he said all of this.
Wait. Who was this? Was this Pete Hegseth?
No, a military commander. So there's a group called the
unnamed.
Military Religious Freedom Foundation, and they've received over 200 complaints from military members that their commanders are saying things like this. This was text from one specific complaint that I just read to you. But apparently this is a widespread thing throughout our military right now, that commanders are telling U.S. service members that the reason we're in this war is to cause Armageddon so that Christ can return, so that we can get to the end times. The head of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation said these calls have one thing in common. Our service members who are coming to us report the unrestricted euphoria of their commanders and command chains as to how this new biblically sanctioned war is clearly the undeniable sign of the expeditious approach of the fundamentalist Christian end times, as vividly described in the New Testament book of Revelation. So, yeah, exactly. That's probably the most bonkers and disturbing of the many reasons that have been given.
Also, to be fair, like we have been told the end times is coming many, many, many times, and it just still hasn't come yet.
It hasn't come yet.
It hasn't come yet in any of those times.
Yes.
Actually.
One person said that we should collect pajamas and put them on Pete Hegseth's lawn so that he will think the rapture has come, and he didn't get I don't remember where I saw that. Apologies to whoever said that I'm not giving them credit, but I did think it was funny. Okay, so these are some of the basics of what we're working with. Oh, I forgot to mention probably the most important thing to many Iranians anyway, is that on Saturday when these strikes started, the U.S. or Israel, some combination thereof, took out Khamenei, who was the supreme leader of Iran since 1989. So he was the man who was responsible for these tens of thousands of Iranians being killed, massacred in the streets in January. And many, I mean, we could go back much longer. We could go back to 2009. We could go to November of 2019. We could go to the late 1980s when they massacred a bunch of political prisoners in Iran. Um, Anyway, he was the head oppressor of Iranian people from 1989 to 2026. And yes, many people, many Iranians, both inside and outside of Iran, cheered for that man's death. There are some handful of people, right? We've talked about before, there are some people who do actually support this regime. Mostly they are members of the regime, family members of the people of the regime, people who are getting paid by the people who are part of the regime. But the vast majority of Iranians, again, both inside and outside of Iran, celebrated his death. There are videos in Iran of people cheering in the streets. There's people shouting from their windows across apartment buildings out of joy that he is finally gone. And he was one man. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been around a long time. It's been there since 1979, and there's a reason they've survived this long. They are smart. They may be evil, but they're also smart, in contrast with our government. But they have really been very thoughtful. I'm not saying that as a positive, but they've been very thoughtful about how their infrastructure has been designed. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps um, is either between somewhere I've seen 150,000 to 200,000 people who are not just in service of the regime, but they are the regime. And they also are not just military or security forces, they also run a significant portion of Iran's economy. They are integral to the function of the country as it is, and they are fully integrated into the Islamic Republic of Iran. So the success of these IRGC members depends on the success of the government. So they can't, not that they can't, but it's unlikely that they're going to turn on the government, which is ultimately what we need. We would need them to defect and join the people, but their incentives are not aligned to do that.
So I obviously have not followed this as closely as you have, but I've been trying to keep up. And I did hear somebody interviewing President Trump about, what's the worst that could happen now that you've, taken out
Oh,
this
yeah.
man? And he was, and like, who do you think's going to be next? And he was like, well, there's some other people that we thought maybe we'd put in, but they might be dead too. And there's some other people, but they might also be dead. So I guess the worst thing that could happen is we just end up with somebody who's worse than that guy. And like the casual,
Yeah.
less the state building that we're getting this administration.
No, I mean, clearly he does not care about what happens with the people of Iran. I have a whole video about, is the US actually trying to free the people of Iran? I think it's pretty obvious the answer to that is no. I mean, we can have a whole different conversation about if they were, would they even be successful? But are they even trying? And the answer, I think, is pretty clearly no. Like, if they were trying, just to give you a snippet, they would have thought about these internet blackouts, right? Like, we already know it's very well established. That's what the Iranian government does when there's any sort of unrest. They shut off the internet. So they could have made plans to make sure that people in Iran could get around these blockages and blackouts. And some people think that there have been some Starlinks that have been smuggled in. I don't really know if that's happened or not, but certainly not on a big scale, right? Like, the people who monitor internet activity in Iran have been telling us since Saturday that there's almost no activity. So whatever efforts, even if they were minimal, have been made, have not been successful. So that's a thing that would have been helpful. If you think, like, at different points, Trump has obviously said different things because that's what he does. There's no consistency, but he has said, like, it's up to the people. The people need to take over. They need to take control of their government. Well, how do they do that if they can't communicate with each other, right? And how do they do that when they have no weapons and you know that the government is armed with military grade weapons? And not only are there
Yeah.
those like 200,000 IRGC, but we also have the besieged. And we don't actually know how many of those there are. Estimates are up to 10 million. I mean, they're wide ranging estimates of how many besieged this paramilitary force there are. So sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, like, I feel like we've seen this movie before, when we were like, we've been in Afghanistan for all of these years and we're just going to all of a sudden be like, peace out, guys, we're gone. And shocker, it didn't go well. And I'm not
Although
saying that,
we should lay the blame for that where it was, which is on Trump, because he released a bunch of Taliban operatives before
yeah.
he led that withdrawal. So I think like the complexities that I hope to try to communicate to folks, because you can read about like specific news events anywhere, but I think what has been really challenging to think about, to talk about, to communicate about in these last days and almost week is the mixed feelings among diaspora Iranians, but more importantly, Iranians in Iran. I think what a lot of people don't understand, especially in the US, is that people in Iran were desperate. You and I have talked about this. They have come out in the streets time and time again, and every time there's been massive loss of life and detentions on top of that. When we lose, like we talk about these 40,000, 50,000, however many were killed in January, but then another set of tens of thousands were detained. And these people are not treated in any remotely humane way in prison. There have been, we've talked about before, reports on the widespread sexual violence, for example, in Iran's prisons. And the executions come very quickly, and there's not a formal legal, I mean, there is a prescribed formal legal process, but it's not really, um, people aren't held to those standards. Confessions are forced out of people for things they never did in order to protect their families. There's all sorts of like terrible things that you see often in fiction, to be honest. But anyway, those are the things that are the reality for people in Iran. And so many people there are desperate to see a change. They have been begging the international community for help for a long time. Now, does that have to be military force? No. And I've said this many times that there are specific diplomatic activities that I wish other countries had taken. They could have, for example, expelled the family members of the regime who live in Europe and the US and Canada, or they could have frozen their assets. They could freeze the assets of the regime members where they hold their assets in other countries. There's lots of things. They could expel Iranian diplomats. They could close down their embassies in Europe. I mean, there's many diplomatic actions that could have been taken and were not. Now, would they have led to a regime change? I don't know. Obviously, I don't predict the future, but there are things that could have been tried without military force that were not, is the point I'm trying to make. And this is what's happening. I mean, whatever we think about it, this is what's happening now. And there are plenty of people in Iran who welcome it. I'm not even saying it's the majority because we don't know. We don't have good data. When there's no internet and no journalists from outside are allowed there, any news you get from inside Iran by so-called journalists is controlled by the regime, even if it's like a CNN journalist or a BBC journalist. Everything they put out is approved by the regime before it goes out if they are actually inside Iran. So people should know that. So all that to say,
Well,
some
and the
number
other
of people.
Well, the other thing I would say is that you were just telling us how, families have been told, like, if anyone in your family says anything in opposition to the regime, then we are going to execute them. And so even if we did have good data, I mean, what I'm hearing is there are going to be a lot of people who are simply not going to share their honest opinion one way or the other, because the only opinion that keeps your family safe is to say that you support the regime.
That's right. That's right. And we have no freedom of the press, just as a reminder for folks, obviously in Iran. So some number of people, and it's a decent number. Do I know what proportion? No, I don't. But I know what I see from folks posting online about their experiences. For example, there's tons of videos now of bombs exploding like in Tehran or Isfahan or whatever. And often if you're paying attention, there's joy in the voices of the people. They're like, oh, there it goes. There's another one. What building was that? And I'm not saying that's good, and I'm not saying that's how I would feel, but what I'm saying is that is how some people in Iran are feeling. And I think that's very hard for people in the US to understand, but it tells you how desperate they are for help. Now, do they think the US is actually trying to help them? No, they're also not stupid. Like, they understand that Trump is not their friend. They understand that Netanyahu is not their friend. What many of them are thinking is that for a brief moment in time, the interests of the US and Israel may line up with the interests of the Iranian people, to the extent that the interests of the US and Israel were to, for example, get rid of Khamenei, to the extent that they're trying to get rid of the IRGC, for example. It's not clear that that's what they're doing, but to the extent that they're trying to do that, the Iranian people, or a lot of them, are in favor of those efforts because they see that as a chance. They don't see that like, oh yeah, they're going to come rescue us. Oh, the US is going to liberate us. No, most people do not see it that way. in Iran. But what they see is a chance at disruption, a chance that they did not have themselves without weapons. Is that everybody? No, no group is a monolith. Are they scared? Yes. I mean, again, to the extent that I see, do I know every Iranian in Iran? Obviously not. But what I'm seeing from reactions from the videos and comments that are being posted is that there's a lot of fear, but there's also some hope, which is something that they have not had at all, especially after that uprising in January that was just completely shut down by the brutality of this government. And so when I say things like, I don't think that the US bombing Iran is going to make Iranians support their brutal government, and people laugh at me and call me names, I'm not saying that because that's what I out of nowhere think sitting here in California. It's because that's what I know of people in Iran. The people who would rather go march in the streets and risk dying than to be stuck with this regime, to think that they are going to be mad that someone's taking out IRGC military bases is really inconsistent. And then people will say, well, you think they're cheering the murder of schoolgirls? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. What a ridiculous thing to say. And they've already lost tens of thousands of people, and they are desperate to have a regime that's not going to continue killing them.
Well, and I think what you see from the US, which is not super surprising, is a combination of both moral disengagement. So you talked earlier about, like, yeah, people are really worked up now because suddenly the US is in a war, and ascribing it to the harm of these kids and whatever. Um, but having nothing to say in the past. And then you also have this moral superiority that, like, we just love in America. We love to be morally superior to everyone, regardless of the degree to which it is earned. And so that's when you share the kinds of horrid interactions you have online with people who are, like, ascribing a lot of meaning to the things that you say that are things that you never said.
Mhm.
I really hear this combination of, like, it's like the outrage. People love to be outraged
Mhm.
right now, especially the moral disengagement of, like, not wanting to see what's been happening and only deciding to pop in and be engaged in
Mhm.
very particular times, and this constant set of moral superiority, the desperate need to be right and to be over someone else, whoever it is, even if it's some random person on the internet that they don't
Mhm.
know.
Mhm. Yeah, and obviously people in the US have a right to be upset. As we said, this
Sure.
is an illegal war. He did not go to Congress. Trump did not go to Congress to get approval for this war. He didn't even, we can talk about George Bush all we want, but at least that man tried to convince people that he was doing the right thing, even though obviously it wasn't the right thing. But he campaigned for a long time and acted like and actually seemed to some extent care what people actually thought, which is obviously not the case here. And so people in the US have every right to be outraged that their taxpayer dollars are being spent on a war that they did not want to engage in. And at the same time, as we've talked about many times, people are losing health care, people don't have housing, people don't have access to healthy food. And then I saw an estimate that was $1 billion a day being spent on this war in Iran. Obviously, we have right to be outraged about that. Obviously, we have a right to be outraged that our taxpayer dollars are killing people in other countries. So, just to touch on that briefly, the New York Times estimates something like 900 people have been killed across the different countries, including Iran's strikes, right, on other countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Lebanon, and Israel. And we've lost at least 6 U.S. soldiers who were based in Kuwait. I should note that an Iranian human rights agency that's based in the U.S. estimates over 1,000 civilian deaths in Iran, 183 of them being children, with another 6,000 injured. It's very hard to know exactly what the numbers are. So obviously, I'm also a U.S. citizen. Like, I am also upset that we are doing that to people, and I have to hold in my head also that there are some Iranians who see this as the only chance at this point of getting rid of the regime that's been oppressing them for 47 years. Do they think Trump is going to make that happen? No, they don't. They absolutely don't. But they're seeing a moment of disruption, as I said, and they think maybe there's a way. Maybe there's a way,
Sure.
not because Trump is going to make it happen, not because Netanyahu is going to make it happen, but
But
maybe
maybe
there's
this opens up a space for people in Iran to be able to do something.
basically, that's the idea. Now, is that, again, not everyone? Others are very much against it. And the same is true in the diaspora. There are, honestly, it's disturbing to me. There are some people in the diaspora who are very supportive of this war. They're wearing like Lindsey Graham shirts and thanking President Trump. And I can't wrap my head around that because watching, I was born in Tehran. That was the first home I ever knew. And watching these bombs, I've been there multiple times, watching these bombs explode all over this metropolis. That's a beautiful city with also so much culture and history is heartbreaking. So I don't understand those who are like so excited. And those same people, the second you say anything like, hey, maybe the US doesn't actually care about Iranians, they will call you a traitor as an Iranian. And they'll say that you're betraying our people by expressing that maybe the US motives here aren't genuine. So it's just a really like challenging space to try to communicate in on any platform, both with Iranians and with US citizens, because emotions are very high, understandably. And especially for Iranians, we're dealing with decades of state induced trauma. And so people have a lot of reactions. Like, do I
Yeah,
love that I grew up away from my family? No. And do I have a lot of anger toward this regime that they did this to us, that they spread Iranians all over the country? Yeah, I have a lot of anger over that. Um, but not as much as the people who are living there still, every day on the street, not knowing if they're going to see their son or daughter back home after work or whatever. Anyway, I could ramble on, but my point is just that there is a lot of complexity here, both in the
sure.
Muslim diaspora and in Iran. There are people who have lots of different opinions, but here we are. And the question I think that haunts us all the most is there a way that this actually leads to this regime being overturned? And if so, how do we make that happen? What can we do from here? What can Iranians inside Iran do from there, knowing that the US and Israel are not going to help them on that part? But what can we do to increase the chances that that happens as opposed to what we saw in Iraq, what we saw in Afghanistan, um, what's happened in many different countries where the U.S. has intervened that has led to just destruction and dissolution of any sort of functioning government. Um, those are the things I think a lot about, and
Mm,
I'm scared. Like a lot of people, I'm scared they are going to absolutely destroy Tehran. And they've already damaged the Golistan Palace, which is a palace that's been there since at least the 1800s. Which it's a UNESCO heritage site. Um, there's been damage to a lot of hospitals. Patients have had to be evacuated from multiple hospitals because of the damage. Although they weren't, I guess to be fair, whatever, they weren't the target. They were near some other target, and so the blast damaged the hospitals.
oh, and this is just because you're talking about hospitals, and we had touched on this briefly previously. I sent you, I think it was Sunday morning, there was a big spread in the New York Times of, um, doctors, nurses, healthcare workers throughout Iran really talking about the horrors that you have been telling our audience about. Um, and I mean, I believed you, and I, had I had read some of those, but seeing, we'll put a link in the show notes, but, seeing so much of that and then finding out about the war being launched, in the middle of the night right before that being,
Mhm,
posted. I mean, I myself have a lot of complex feelings. I think this is the first time in my life that I've actually not had a family member in active military service. So all the wars that you just mentioned, my family went to
mhm.
all of those, and, I just I'm deeply, deeply alarmed by the situation that has been allowed to unfold in Iran. And I'm very concerned about the way that this intervention is being conducted. And especially having, I really try not to listen to Pete Hegseth ever, if possible, because like he really makes me really angry. Um, but listening to the way that he has characterized the response to this and like, we're not going to have any more politically correct wars. I'm like, shut the
Yeah, and
fuck up.
no rules of engagement. We're not following any rules of engagement.
We're not doing any of that woke shit.
Well,
I
did you see?
just
I want to just give an example of that. So there was an Iranian ship that was part of an exercise organized by India. And the US was supposed to be part of this exercise and pulled out at the last minute. These ships did not have any weapons. That was part of whatever this exercise was that they were doing. There were no weapons on these ships. The US pulled out of the exercise and then basically destroyed that ship, that Iranian ship that was there as part of this exercise with India. And that ship had nothing to do with, yeah, exactly. They had no weapons, they had nothing. And that's a war crime. That's a violation of international law. Um, I have no love lost, as you know well, for anyone who's involved with the IRGC or or the Iranian government. But it's important to note that military service is mandatory in Iran. So men of, I forget the exact ages, but they are required to serve. So some of the people on that ship also could not give two hoots about that government, but are forced to serve there. And not only did the US bomb that ship, but then they didn't make any effort to rescue any of the people who had been on that ship. I believe, I can't remember if it was India or another country, somebody else made efforts to rescue them and were successful apparently at rescuing some of the crew from that ship. And they made a video, right? The White House made a video glamorizing this. Everything is a video game to these people. I saw some poor person who didn't even have a large account. She was like, they were like, "That's my song. How did they even find the song? It has like 1,000 listens on whatever platform. What do I do?" Like, it was a very small artist. I don't want this. What do I do about this? Why are they using my song in this way? Kesha also, they use one of her songs for also war propaganda, and she made multiple posts about how this is not okay with her. Anyway, it's all a video game, but to them, but there are real people. There are real people. There are real U.S. people. There are real people in Lebanon. There are real people in the UAE. There are real people everywhere being affected by this, including obviously Iran. Um, anyway, so I guess what I'm just trying to convey to folks is that it's maybe not as clear cut as some folks would like it to be. Yes, war is bad. Yes, this was illegal. Yes, Trump is incompetent and a terrible person. And there are some people in Iran who are happy to see someone taking out IRGC military bases. So it's not accurate to say that this is entrenching Iranians against the US. Some Iranians, certainly not all Iranians. And it's also not accurate to say that Iranians are stupid and think that Trump is going to help them. No, they don't think that either. And there's just a lot of gray here, and people have a hard time with that. I understand. It is challenging. It is challenging. You want to think, well, if the IRGC is bad, the US is good, or if the US is bad, IRGC is good. No, they're both bad. They're both bad. The only good here is the people. That's who's good. And that's who we're trying to protect. And that's who we need to center. And we can understand that the US government here, not just for this specific case we've talked about ICE, we've talked about many other things, that the US government is doing a lot of bad things for people in the US and people outside the US. And also the Iranian government also does a lot of bad things for the people in Iran and people outside of Iran. These are both bad actors. And then people always go, what about Israel? Yeah, same. I mean, like, none of these actors are good actors, and we don't have to pretend like they are. There's not a good guy and a bad guy here, again, except for the people.
Arghavan, I really appreciate all the work that you have done to update our listeners, including me, on all of those details that you brought to this, and especially your perspective as someone in the diaspora. I think that's something that's often missing for people who don't have the privilege, like me, of knowing someone like you. And now we're going to move on to the second topic. Are you
Yeah.
ready, Arghavan?
Oh, I sure am.
We're going to talk about Casey Means. We have to talk about her. She is the current nominee for Surgeon General of the United States. She was nominated back in May 2025 by President Trump. She just recently had her confirmation hearings, which I watched them. I watched the whole thing.
Oh, the whole thing. Wow.
I did. I'll be honest with you. I did it on 2X, though, because I was like, this is going to take so long.
Yeah.
So I listened to it on 2X, and it was very painful, but I did it. I did it for us, Arghavan.
Oh, thank you for doing that. That's quite the service.
Well, you did all that work to keep me updated on Iran, so I wanted to be able to update you on this. Um, so Casey Means is a former physician and longevity wellness influencer. And she was nominated for Surgeon General after somebody else was nominated for Surgeon General. So there was a woman who was initially Trump's pick who was named Dr. Jeanette Neishwat. I'm not actually certain how to pronounce her name. She was a former Fox News medical contributor.
Mhm.
And it turns out she had not been entirely honest about having gotten her medical degree. And so she had very much allowed people to believe that she had gotten her medical degree from the University of Arkansas, where she completed her residency. But in
Mm,
fact, her medical degree was actually from the American University of the Caribbean School of
mm,
Medicine in Saint Martin.
mhm,
And I don't know. I guess earlier in the administration, they were a little more committed to this like radical transparency thing that they claim they're going to do. I mean, I do feel like they're over that now, but
I'm not really sure there was much of an effort at that in the first
yeah,
place.
but like
My guess is there's something
surface
else
level.
about her that they didn't like. I mean, I think she actually had promoted back to just to be honest, I'm pretty sure it's been a while since I looked into her, but I think that she had promoted vaccines at some point. So maybe
Well,
that was the real
that's a real
yeah.
downer in this
Mhm,
administration.
mhm. I do wonder if that's like the real issue there. Who knows?
Well, RFK freaking loves Casey Means and
And her
loves
brother.
her brother
Mhm.
Callie Means. Casey Means actually attended RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearings back before this hellscape was unleashed in our public health. Um, and there's a disclaimer I think that you and I both really should do because, it's all over the news. Casey Means went to Stanford Medical School. It's
He
where
did.
you went to medical school.
Correct.
It's where we both work.
It's
Nothing that
also
we
where
say.
Peter yeah, went to medical school. Giving us a
Yes.
great name.
Yes, yes, Stanford has graduated some real winners.
Yeah.
You're a real winner, but I was saying that sarcastically about some of the other people. But you and I both work at Stanford University. This show is not we do not speak for Stanford University. We do not get this is our free time. This is our hobby outside of our full-time jobs. So we don't receive any money or anything from Stanford to do this project.
Mhm.
Um, I will say neither of us actually was at Stanford while she was there. Um, she finished medical school before I started my fellowship there and and later my faculty position. Um, which I'll say I felt immense relief because somebody asked me like, "Oh, do you know Casey Means? She went to Stanford." And this was a few years ago before she got really famous.
Mhm.
And I was like, "God, I haven't heard of her." But then I was like, "Oh, I have seen this book, You Could Not Get Away From It." It
Oh,
was in,
yeah.
like, every airport in America, this good energy book, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And I looked up when she graduated, and I was like it was very clear that she had become this wellness influencer and had a lot of health influencer things that I am not a huge fan of, especially in terms of, like, selling supplements and whatever. And so I was like, "Oh, thank goodness," because I teach ethics to every single medical student, every single PA student that graduates from Stanford. And, we only get a few hours to teach them during their entire medical school career, but I was like, "Oh, thank God she was not in my class."
That must be a relief.
That would have been I mean, I'm sure that sometime in the future, there will be some other jamoke that will have taken my class and will still turn out to be a grifter, but, you know, at least it wasn't this
You
one.
dodged this bullet, yes.
I dodged this one. Um so anyway, so she graduates from Stanford Medical School. One of her perpetual lies is that she was top of her class at Stanford, but as you know, there are not class rankings at Stanford.
Yeah.
Students are not pitted against each other in terms of, they're top of their class.
They're
And
not
I'll
there's
link
no grades even. There's only after I graduated, they started this pass with distinction thing. So many medical schools, listeners may know, have various grading schemas for their clinical time, even if they don't have grades for their preclinical time. But Stanford has, I mean, I was lucky when I was in medical school. We didn't have that at all. The entire 4 years were pass fail. But then they added, due to pressure from, the AMC and residency programs having difficulty distinguishing students from each other. They added this pass with distinction. So at Stanford Medical School, you get a fail, a pass, or a pass with distinction. So it's not, A, B, C, D, F, or anywhere close to that. Anyway, carry on.
Sure. Well, and I'll put a link in the show notes for people who want to see our friend Eric Strong, who's also a faculty member at Stanford, did a really great video picking apart her book, and I will share some fun facts from that. But it was interesting because he did teach there while she was a student, and he was like, "Yeah, none of me and my friends, like, none of us remember her, so she can't have been that great because nobody remember nobody remembers her." But whatever. So she she must, however, have done well enough in medical school and on her exams. She got a really very competitive residency spot. She got into the ENT program, otolaryngology, ear, nose, and throat surgery program at Oregon Health Sciences University, which is in Portland, Oregon. It's a very prestigious program. Very difficult to get into that specialty, as folks, inside the House of Medicine know. She did not complete it. She quite late in her training, took a leave of absence, attempted to come back, and then decided to leave that program. So she never finished residency. She does not have an active license to practice medicine and has never worked as an attending physician.
Yeah, but
Um,
let's talk about that for just one second.
sure.
So, ENT is 5 years of surgical residency. As I recall from when I looked into her more in detail when her nomination was first announced, as I recall, she made it all the way to the last year.
Yeah. Similar
And
to Atia,
correct,
who
correct.
did
He
not
also
finish his
made it
surgical
several years
residency.
into his surgical residency before leaving. Um, and look, we don't know what exactly happened. She has said she became disillusioned with medicine. Um, but what I can say is it's very unusual to leave a surgical
Yeah.
residency in your last year, because even if you've decided you're not going to practice, you've made it all the way through the 4 years of med school and now you're in your fifth year of residency. Once you finish that fifth year, you can get a board certification, which she will never be able to get because she never finished the residency.
Hmm.
Um, so it's not typical to leave at that stage. And it has a lot of people wondering if she was either asked to leave or if she was asked to repeat a year and did not want to do that. Obviously, we don't know. This is speculation, but it is just very unusual to leave at that point.
Well, the LA Times actually did interview the chair
That's
of
right.
that program.
That's
Yep,
right.
and so actually, I'll read you a quote. His name's Dr. Paul Flint, and he claims that she left because she found the job too stressful. And so in that quote, at least she had the strength to recognize that in her fourth year. It took a lot of guts. I did not push her out the door. He adds, however, you lose some credibility when you just drop out. He says he believes that since then she has mischaracterized U.S. medicine as a conspiracy to keep people sick. She's wrong, he said, adding, it's a certain attitude that denies all the successes that occur in medicine. So there's actually two articles. There's the LA Times article, and then there was a Vanity Fair article that also came out, I think, the next day. So I'll put links to both of those in the show notes. There's also several of her co-residents who have anonymously provided comments as well. Um, Again, I still truly cannot imagine. I mean, you and I both did very competitive residencies, very difficult residencies. I think almost all residencies are very difficult. And like, gosh, when you're that close to the finish line, you are really giving up a lot. Um, and it is very stressful. And I think a lot of us think periodically about
Yeah,
about quitting.
absolutely. I mean, I think thank you for bringing up that article. I had read that article again back when she was first announced as the nominee. And what I wondered at the time was, did they have any sort of separation agreement when she left? Like, was
Yeah,
this,
I don't know.
the agreed upon story? It's always hard to know. And I'm not saying that to fuel like whatever, but it just that it is possible that she was asked to leave or asked to repeat a year and didn't want to do that. And then this was the agreed upon narrative for why she left.
Sure.
Like a legal agreement that this was the story that was going to be told. I have no reason necessarily to suspect that aside from, as you said, why would you leave at that stage? Of course it's stressful. We all found it very stressful. Like I definitely thought about quitting. I don't know anybody who didn't think about quitting. But especially that late in the game, I mean, you're almost there. So anyway, carry on.
Yeah. Um, So she then, after leaving, built this reputation as, "Oh, I've completely transformed, and that's why I left medicine."
Mm,
So she's rebranded herself as somebody who just, saw the failures of medicine and just had to leave and find a better way.
mhm.
And decided to do that by founding a company that would sell rich people a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
and to make a lot of money.
Well, and
And
are you gonna talk about her mom's cancer?
I wasn't going to talk about it in detail, but I was going to mention it. And my heart goes out to her. Her mother died of pancreatic cancer. It's terrible. Um, any sort of a loss is so sad.
Mhm.
Um, I I was not able to finish her book. I found it so irritating and disingenuous. However, she does use her mother as this sort of narrative tool, frankly, to drive this whole story of like how absurd it is that her mother, had several chronic illnesses. I mean, it sounds like hypertension,
Mm,
prediabetes, whatever, obesity, very run of the mill
mhm,
stuff in
mhm,
America. Um, they're obviously very wealthy families, so she saw lots and lots of specialists, which again, not super clear um, why. Her mom flew back and forth from here in Palo Alto, here in California,
mhm,
to Mayo Clinic to get additional workup or whatever, and ended up dying very shortly, I think a week and a half after her diagnosis with pancreatic cancer, which is not unusual,
mhm.
especially when a lot of times people's initial diagnosis is when they're actually having quite late stage
Mhm.
symptoms. Yeah.
Yeah. The
Um,
reason I asked about it was just that what I recall is that she has said that she thought her mom wouldn't have gotten pancreatic cancer if she'd had different dietary habits, and there's really no evidence for that, and she has made this part of her story of why she didn't stay in traditional medicine, that, she saw what happened to her mom and felt like her death was preventable if only she'd had different habits, earlier, and I understand why that's actually somewhat of a comforting narrative to believe because, as
sure.
we talked about before, it's nice to think that you could control something like pancreatic cancer and that if she had more, I don't know, leafy greens, that she wouldn't have died, but that's just not reality. Pancreatic cancer is a devastating diagnosis. The likelihood of living past 5 years is somewhere around 10%. It's just a terrible, terrible disease, and she's unlucky, and it's tragic that her mom got it, but then to turn that into this whole empire, basically deceiving people, um, is hard for me to support.
Well,
Anyway, go on.
and her mom's not alive to stand up for herself, defend herself. She just gets to be this. I'm not saying that Means doesn't love her mother, and I can only
Mhm.
imagine how traumatizing this
Yeah.
experience was. But, yeah, spinning a comforting narrative that uses your mom to make a lot of money, I don't love it. I don't love it.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, I have people in my life that have died of pancreatic cancer. It's a horrible disease. It is tragic. Um You and I have both been in the operating room when someone's having an exploratory surgery to determine whether or not their pancreatic cancer is operable, to find out that there's nothing to do and you just close them back up and have to wake them up and tell them this devastating news. So I have immense compassion for people who are going through this. I also think that she has woven this entire narrative of like doctors don't learn anything about nutrition. And I was thinking about it and like do I think that we could learn more about nutrition? Absolutely. Would I love to see even better nutrition education? Sure. Um but I have like never in my entire life gone to a doctor, like a primary care doctor or pediatrician and not had a conversation about a healthy diet.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about it. I was thinking about when I was in medical school, my first year of medical school is when we first started doing OSCEs, which are like for
Mhm.
people who are not familiar, they're these you know, exams where you have to like work with a standardized patient and do a history and physical, and you need to do some counseling, and other people watch you do that and then give you feedback on how you can do that more effectively. And I remember my very first like practice OSCE, I had to coach another medical student I actually had to do my coaching on smoking cessation, and then my partner had to do dietary counseling with
Mm.
me. And so it was like literally one of the very first
Mm.
skills we learned was how to do dietary counseling for people. And it's, there's nothing in this book that she has either that's like a revolution. You should eat more vegetables. Like, no fucking shit, lady. Like
Well, that's like
every
when RFK Jr. and all his cronies say things like doctors don't talk about diet and exercise. Like that's, I mean, most people are frustrated that they go to see their doctor to talk
and that's
about
all they
headaches.
get. Why can't you
And
give
then
me a
all they
pill?
get is, well, what are you eating and how much are you exercising? I mean, that's just like a standard part of the conversation, and they think it's revolutionary to suggest that doctors should be talking about diet and exercise.
Well, I
Anyway,
mean, this whole grift of vilifying medicine for the overall failures of society and like what foods are we allowed to be sold and who gets to make enough money to go to a farmer's market versus
well,
who gets to make enough money, who lives in a food desert and who doesn't.
yeah.
Like I mean, she's this longevity grifter like a Tia,
Mhm.
and it turns out that the zip code that you're born in is far more predictive of your life expectancy than whether or not you have access, well, obviously there's a lot of connection between your zip code and what you have access
Yeah.
to. But again, this whole book is really written from the grounding of rich people and like
Mhm.
what do rich people get to have? And to be fair, rich people buy books. They buy books, and so that's a great market if you
Mhm.
are going to sell books. Is to
Mhm.
sell them to market it to people who have the money to buy them.
Well, and rich people can have their own spa in their house, the way that RFK Jr. and Kid Rock
Don't
they
Why
can
do you have
have
to
their
make
own
me think about
cold
that
plunge.
terrible oh, oh I
Anyway, they can
literally
have an
started
entire
seeing that
home gym, and then
video.
yes, I know it's a terrible ad I just made.
You did that to
I
me.
I apologize, but like that's also part of that problem. Like that whole
Yeah.
campaign is like, yeah, if you had a fancy gym, you could ride a stationary bike every day or whatever. You
Yeah.
can get in a sauna and what. Most people don't have access to any of that. Anyway,
I mean,
carry on.
there is literally a chapter in this book called Trust Yourself, Not Your Doctor. And then she had the audacity, and I will get into this when we talk more closely about the confirmation hearings, where she says over and over and over again in this hearing, like it is the main, like that's her main thing that she goes back to is, oh, every patient should have the opportunity to discuss with their doctor, which like, there's a lot of people who don't have access to a doctor, so that's terrible. Also, your very, very popular book says trust yourself, not your doctor. So, I mean, forgive me if I'm not super convinced, okay?
Not
I mean,
very
she
internally
bangs
consistent.
away on it in the hearing. Like, I was so fucking tired of hearing her say that when I was like, but you don't even trust or believe doctors. You
Yeah.
left the profession because you were so burned out or whatever, and you've decided to spin this narrative that it's like, oh, doctors are the problem. Like, you're not a, anyway. It makes me very annoyed.
Mm.
So anyway, I'm gonna put in. We're not gonna spend a ton of time talking about this book, but I am gonna put in a link to Eric Strong did a video. I kid you not. He did this heroic labor. Thank you, Eric. He went through he read the whole book, but what he did is he was like, it would take me too long to go through this entire book, so I'm just gonna go through the 11-page introduction.
Mm.
And he literally went through there's no citations in this book, by the way.
Oh.
It's apparently a science book. Um, and, I just put that in air quotes for people who are doing the audio, like, anyway, if you're gonna write a science book and you have no citations, I am concerned. And, Eric points out she did, however, have 50 pages of recipes, but no citations for the dubious claims, so that's cute. That's
Mhm.
really cute. So anyway, Eric did this work. You can listen to him for an hour. He goes through and he actually takes every single one of her claims and says like whether it's true or not. He tries to like reverse engineer where some of these
Mm.
numbers might have come from and figuring out like based on the best available evidence like what would that number be and like
Yeah.
was she close, was she
Yeah.
far, was she in the same like stratosphere, I don't know. Um and so I think that that's really helpful, and especially because it's only 11 pages and, like, it was an hour-long video. I mean, there was a lot to unpack, and, he goes through and actually finds, real sources and then provides provides that backup. So I think that for folks who are, I mean, listen, I think that if you're somebody who wants to believe Casey Means, if you're into her brand of healthism, which like really blames individuals
Mhm.
for everything that happens in their health, which is the Maha, that's a core element of the
Yeah.
Maha belief system is healthism. Then yeah, you're probably going to love her book and you're going to love if you can afford her, program that costs, $1,500 a year. I mean, I guess go ahead. But if you're somebody where you're a little bit skeptical and you want to see what you should really believe, Eric Strong has done the research for you. You
Mm.
don't have to do it all yourself. He has gone through the data as an expert physician, as an expert medical educator, and he has made that available. So
That's
thank you,
great.
Eric Strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay, so let's move on to the Senate confirmation hearings.
Great.
Is it? Um,
I only watched the clips and I found it infuriating, so I can only
yeah,
imagine how you feel.
I I really was committed to doing this for you. I wanted this to be my gift,
Aw.
and so okay. So first of all, her hearing was supposed to initially happen in October 2025, and the reason that that didn't happen is because she actually went into labor with her first child. Like 5 hours before the hearing started. So, very appropriately, the hearings were appropriately delayed. Now, to show how little I expect of the Senate, um, in the past, there have been other times where people have tried to pass woman friendly, parent friendly things for the Senate that have had a really hard time getting through. So the fact that they didn't just disqualify her from
Mm.
office because she had a baby, I mean, I guess that's one positive. Um, they did open the hearing with, congratulating her on having her baby. There was a 15-minute break in the middle of the hearings. It said presumably for her to go breastfeed her child.
Mm.
Now, again, I would say, first of all, a 15-minute break in the middle of a 2-hour confirmation hearing seems very reasonable. I will say I was breastfeeding my baby when I was a chief resident in anesthesia. And for those who don't know the culture of anesthesia, we get a 15-minute break. And now the 15-minute break begins the moment that you leave the operating room and it ends with the moment you return to the operating room. So you got to include travel time. So I saw Casey Means get up and go off to presumably go breastfeed her baby, which means she maybe had like, if it was really close wherever she was going, like, maybe she had 12 minutes to, like,
Right.
breastfeed her baby. I'm assuming that her baby was there and she didn't have to
Mm.
pump. I will tell you the difficult that is basically what I had to do. I had to run from an operating room.
Mhm.
I had to go to um, I would use our call room, which, by the way, had, like, a keypad on the outside, so anybody who knew the keypad could get into the room. There was no, like, internal lock.
Yeah.
So I had to, like, create a little badge that I would put that was like, "I'm breastfeeding in here,"
Mhm,
or
mhm.
"I'm pumping," and there was always this one guy who constantly walked in on me. I was just like, "Bro, did you do this in college when people put a sock on the door? Like, do you not read the signs? Don't
Yes.
just read the sign." Anyway, and you're, like, super stressed out because now you basically have, like, a little more than 10 minutes
Mhm.
to breastfeed, and then all these fucking mommy blogs are like, "It's so hard to breast try to relax, watch a picture of your baby," and I'm just going like, "Get out of my body." I'm milking myself with this thing, and then you would have to, like, run back to the OR, and of course, like, half the time, my attendings would completely blow me off, and so I'd be, like, practically leaking milk before I even got out there. So
Mhm.
anyway, cheers to this, Casey Means that you got to have a break to go breastfeed, and I know it wasn't long enough, so I am gonna acknowledge that is
Hmm.
an area where I think the Senate could improve in the future if they're looking for pro tips for helping women who are mothers, and breastfeeding to participate in civic society.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so it opens up and, oh god, I can't think of his name. The guy who had the deciding vote for RFK to
Bill
be able to be
Cassidy.
confirmed. Say it again?
Bill Cassidy.
Bill Cassidy. Thank you. So Bill Cassidy opens it up and, he's a pediatrician. And so he's like, oh, welcome back. We know why you needed to delay because you had a baby. Congrats on your baby. Great. Shortly later, it's Bernie Sanders time and he and he very cursorily congratulates her on having a baby, and it was, like, kind of hilarious because he doesn't care.
No.
He's like, "Moving on to my questions." Um, so but what I thought was really funny was Bernie Sanders, clearly was hoping that he could get her to he was saying, "Hey, I think there's some things that we could agree on. I think we can agree on the fact that Americans need better access to healthcare."
Yeah.
She kind of answers that, and he's clearly trying to get her to then eventually, as one of his last things, to acknowledge that a single-payer healthcare system would be the best thing for Americans. And she doesn't take the bait, shocker, and um, so she didn't come out for single payer healthcare. I don't think any of us are surprised, but I thought it was a valiant effort by Bernie to try.
Mhm.
He was like, that's the one thing I think we need. And nope, we're not going there. Okay, great. So, and each of the senators only has like a few minutes to ask however
Yeah.
many important questions they have. Um, So anyway, she demurred from that, and then it switches over to, Markwayne Mullin, who we mentioned, in part 1 of this episode. He is the, senator from Oklahoma. He is, from the Cherokee Nation. The 2 of these guys, like Bernie Sanders and Markwayne Mullin, like, they hate each other.
Oh,
They
really?
hate each other. Did you see the clips?
I think I saw Bernie's. I don't think I saw Mark Wayne's clip that I
So when Bernie is done talking, Markwayne Mullin, it's his turn to start talking. And he spends like at least a minute and a half of his time like berating Bernie Sanders for, I don't know, whatever, being a socialist.
Mhm.
And then like Bernie Sanders is like, well, if you're gonna attack me, I'm gonna speak. And he's like, it's my turn to talk. Ah. And the two of them are just like, nah. And I'm just going like, okay, this is like, I mean, step aside WWE because the Senate confirmation hearings are juicy. They're juicy. Okay. Um, so then it goes back it goes back to Casey Means, who's like, I'm just gonna take a breath after that. Like, she needed to like settle herself after observing these two grown-ass men being dicks to each other in her confirmation hearing about stuff that had nothing to do with her.
Mhm.
It had nothing to do with
Yeah,
her.
it's their own beef.
But they hate each other.
Mhm.
Anyway, I will say she overplays her experience, and this was one of those times where I was just really wanting to yell. I wanted to yell a lot. So she said, having practiced, seen thousands of patients, worked in a system for nearly a decade in clinical medicine, it's not the focus. And she was talking about well-being and
Right.
nutrition and whatever. Um, but I really felt that that was an
Mhm.
overstatement of her qualifications because so now as we talked about, she did do around 4 years of this residency. I don't know if that includes her intern year or not. Um, to call it practicing for nearly 10 years, I think is not fair.
Yeah,
Um,
she's counting all 4 years of med school as practice?
correct. So, and for example, you know, I have been an attending physician for 10 years this year.
Mhm.
I could argue that I have been part of clinical medicine for 20 years,
Yeah.
23 if I count, because my first job was working at a hospital as a clinical ethics assistant back in 2003.
Mhm.
But I would never say I've like been in practice
Yeah.
for 23 years. Like that's not true. I've been in practice for 10 years. And she finished medical school when I was finishing my residency.
Yeah.
So that's not fair
Yeah.
or true. Um, saying that she's seen thousands of patients, that I'm not sure if that's possible during those limited 4 years of a surgical residency. I'm a little
Yeah.
I find that a little sus. Now, I think that she is counting the 10 years that she less it's and still again less than 10 years that she has spent running this company Levels where she's
Oh.
been promoting people using continuous glucose
Mhm.
monitors and metabolic health. Um so I found that to be infuriating as an actual physician with actually 10 years of experience. I
Um,
thought that was I thought that was wrong. I did not agree with her.
Mhm.
It did not find that to be a trustworthy statement. She has said a bunch of disparaging things about birth control over the years,
Yeah.
and Senator Murray tried to call her out on that, and she claimed that she's a supporter of people having access to birth control, but again, kept going into this people need to have a detailed, informed consent conversation with their doctor. And that's the other thing as an ethicist that I have been hyper keyed into is the the MAHA movement, the anti-vax movement. They really love to use the term informed consent
Yeah.
as a unique device.
Mhm.
I think we do need more informed consent and deeper informed consent. And I'm incredible. I'll put a link to the Harriet Washington has a fabulous book called Carte Blanche that talks about how consent has sort of evolved and devolved in many ways, and who is it that are the winners and losers. So I'm a huge fan of informed consent, but I'm noticing it increasingly being used not just in the anti-vaccine movement, but across many other domains of healthcare to imply that physicians are explicitly hiding complications of medications, are hiding
Mhm.
information
Mhm.
from patients, and I don't think that that's true,
Mhm.
generally speaking.
Yeah, generally speaking.
So, yeah. Um, Senator Murray tried to bring up some things that Tracy Beth Hogue has said, which are very anti-vaccine points against RSV. I will tell you, in anybody who is a fan of Casey Means will say she's not anti-vax. She's not. And this is the same as people who are big fans of RFK. They'll be like, he's not anti-vax. He told people they could take the MMR vaccine. They could. So he's not anti-vax. And I'm like, it's such a very narrow view
Mhm.
of what that means. But I will say that her book is full of so many talking points that are perfectly, perfectly aligned with anti-vaccine sentiment. And so again, the thing that she kept saying every time she was asked anything about vaccines is she would go, I think that every person has the right to have a conversation with her doctor, which again, nobody's saying that they don't. Nobody's
Yeah, so
nobody's saying that.
I wanna talk about that for a second because I saw 2 clips that I saw a lot were the section with Bill Cassidy where he's asking
Mm,
her whether she would recommend the measles vaccine.
and she
And
doesn't.
and then the section with Tim Kaine where he spends his entire 3 minutes asking her over and over and over again about the flu vaccine. So he starts out with asking her about something RFK Jr. had said in January that there's no evidence to suggest the flu vaccine prevents serious illness or hospitalization among children. And he asks her, "Is that true?" And she goes, "Oh, I haven't seen that statement. I haven't read that article." He says, "Okay, fine. Put the article aside, put the statement aside. Does the flu vaccine prevent serious illness and hospitalization among children?" And she refuses to answer the question. She like says all sorts of things. And he just keeps asking her over and over and over. And finally, she says, at a population level, it does. And it's like, that's the whole point of vaccines is to operate at a population level. Number one. Number
It's
two,
literally public health.
correct. Number two, this idea that the reason she's saying it that way is because she's an anti-vaxxer, because
Yep.
that allows her to plant the doubt that it may not be right for you or your child, that maybe on the whole it's okay, but not necessarily for you. And then she repeats that same point that you mentioned about people should talk to their doctors. She also says, well, I'm not any one person's doctor. And they say,
Isn't that the
his
truth?
job is to be the nation's doctor. I think that was Bill Cassidy, if I recall, talking about the MMR and saying, like, would you recommend this vaccine? We've got the largest outbreak of
Yeah.
measles that we've had in over 20 years. Would you recommend the vaccine? And she just refused to do it. Anyway, so back to,
Because she doesn't have a license to practice. She can't recommend shit to anybody.
well, and she did have to admit, I think, somewhere in that testimony that she can't prescribe medications. But
It
the
was
things that I thought were clearly anti-vax were her saying you have to talk to your doctor because that's another way of throwing doubt on the whole thing. It was the population level. And then there was one more that I talked about in one of my videos and see if I can remember what it was. But like it was very clear to me just in watching those clips that she's definitely opposed to vaccines. Oh, and this wasn't the third thing, but another thing is that she has in the past said that newborn hepatitis B vaccination is a crime.
Yep,
How is
she
that not
has.
anti-vaccine? I mean, I don't know how
Well,
much
this
more
is what I
anti
mean.
you could
This
be.
is what I mean, right? Is that folks who are so eager to defend these people and themselves, right? Like they know that it's bad to be seen as anti-vax, and so instead they'll say, "Oh, but I'm not anti-vax. I just want people to talk to their doctor."
Mm,
Also, the other thing about this whole like talk to your doctor thing about vaccines that I find really offensive is that part of a major strategy during COVID and for flu is to have people be able to just make an appointment at the pharmacy. And the pharmacist can provide you with that
yeah.
information. And if you have additional questions, they are actually really, really well situated to answer many of those questions. So I also found it to be very, I was offended on behalf of pharmacists.
Mhm. No, I think the
And
whole thing was disingenuous, and she just kept
yeah,
denying, "Well, I haven't seen this, I don't know that." I mean, it's not, as Tim Kaine said, it's a very simple question. Does the flu vaccine prevent serious illness and hospitalization? Which obviously you and I both know the answer is yes, but she couldn't just say that, and it was very clear to me that it was because she didn't want to be seen as being in contradiction of RFK Jr., who is her future boss for this job if she were to get the job. And anyone who's going to put his views or their relationship with him in front of, ahead of the health of the nation is not suitable for that job, even if all those other things were not true. Even if she had a medical license, even if she were board certified, even still, a person who is going to prioritize RFK Jr. over the health of the nation should not hold this position.
well, the thing that when I was listening to that whole section on the flu, the thing that I kept thinking back to is how many ENTs I worked with, both from the ethics service as well as from my anesthesia work, um, you know, doing things like tracheostomies, which is something that people who are going to survive
Mhm.
severe COVID and severe flu, many people have needed because they need a prolonged intubation because their lungs are so damaged, they have such severe pneumonia, they have sepsis. And so I truly kept thinking like, wow, if you had been able to finish your residency and had gone into practice, I
Mm,
wonder, I wonder. And certainly, there are physicians who became more anti-vax during COVID. That is an unfortunate reality. There's definitely a minority of people that did that. But it does make me wonder, if she had genuinely
mm,
had the experience of being an attending physician, somebody who has, it is such immense
yeah,
responsibility. Um, and I know even as a resident, like I knew it was going to be a big deal when I became an attending. I knew that it was going to be a big leap in
yeah,
responsibility, but there was nothing that could have prepared
no,
me for how much actual responsibility
yeah.
it is to be that person.
Yeah, I don't think anyone understands until they're in that moment, and they're
Yeah,
the
to like
final decision maker. There's no one else's name above them on the chart.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really big responsibility that I know that many of us take exceptionally seriously. So I thought that was a bummer. Oh, that was the other thing too that came up about vaccines was that, Bernie Sanders, when he was before the fight,
Mhm.
he was asking her a bunch of questions about, there's all of this data to demonstrate that there's no connection between autism and
Yeah.
the MMR vaccine. Um, and he had a line of questioning related to that. And she refused to basically say, that has been determined.
Mhm.
And so then when Mark Wayne Mullen had his chance to talk, he was like, uh, people are always saying do the science and science is perfect. So like why is it that you're not okay with people doing more research? And I was just like, bro, because we already have spent like bazillions of dollars doing the research
Yeah.
to demonstrate that it's not a fucking problem.
Yeah. There are other things that continue to be like actual problems that are affecting people's health that we should be studying, that we should be spending money on.
Absolutely. So anyway, there was a lot of the vaccine sentiment was prevalent.
Mhm.
Now the other thing that was a huge section of the hearings was her conflicts of interest,
Oh,
which
yes. Yes.
oh yes, conflicts of interest.
Chris
So
Murphy asked her about that, right?
yes. Well, and even before that, there were questions. Senator Baldwin had an entire line of questioning that was related to money that Casey Means had taken from Genova Diagnostics, a company that had to pay out $43 million for medically unnecessary claims that violated the False Claims Act. Um, the False Claims Act is not only about medicine. It was actually started in the Civil War, related to people spending false records
Hmm.
for spending money on the war on the Civil War, and it's also used now to deal with medical fraud. And her response was, "I'm not familiar with that settlement," which I was just like, feel like you would have prepped for that. So I'm going to read you this quote from Senator Baldwin. She said, "It's troubling because the Surgeon General must be a person that the public can trust, someone who does their homework before accepting money or lending credibility to a company. For me, this raises questions about your judgment and does not inspire confidence that you will make America healthy to promote a company who has to pay a settlement for violating the False Claims Act." Um, Senator Baldwin also pointed out that membership into Casey Means's company, for whatever the premier membership is $1,500 a year, which is, she pointed out, the cost of renting an apartment in her for a month in her state. And so she talked a lot about supplements and how many of the people you and I talked about how clearly she's profiting off of wealthy people spending money who are afraid of death, who
Yeah.
want longevity, whatever. But the senator pointed out a third of low income adults have at least two chronic conditions, and they need an affordable solution. So where's the affordable solution that you're going to bring as the nation's doctor? Um, and this quote from Senator Baldwin, delicious. "It seems you've built a career on making money from flaws in the system," which is true. And I think that this is what leads a number of physicians to become these like wellness
Yeah.
hustlers, right? To like sell, you and I often say, like, listen, if a doctor is selling you a supplement, they're probably not a good doctor. They're not somebody who you should be paying attention to. Um, Senator Husted did an entire piece all about farmers and what are we supposed to do with, you say all this stuff about how pesticides are really bad, but how is it that we're supposed to make enough food to feed this nation?
Mhm.
And obviously, that's a very complicated topic. Um, Senator Murphy, really on the heels of Senator Baldwin, talked about how she's violated FTC rules a bazillion times. There's a really great, if people haven't seen it yet, I'll put a link in the show notes. Public Citizen, which is a nonprofit group that does deep dives into, major issues that are impacting Americans, did an entire report on Casey Means, her Maha connections and money, really showing the wide variety of connections that are there that should be deeply alarming to people. So some of the key findings of their report, which showed up throughout the testimony in the hearings, said while Maha wellness influencers lambast conventional medicine, they've amassed their own wellness empires built on selling products and ideas based on distorted views of public health.
Mhm.
And they go on to talk specifically about not only Casey Means and her FTC violations, all the times that she's promoted products without disclosing that she had received money from those companies.
Mhm.
Um, and her brother, Callie Means, who is also the like tech, he's listed as the co-author of her book, although it's not clear to what degree he participated in writing her book. He's a senior HHS advisor, and he also uses his own platforms to promote, false health information. He has a company called True Med that has like a really dubious business model, and anyway, all these people. It is this ecosystem of people profiteering off of the worried well in
Yeah.
America.
That's right. And I think I made a video about Chris Murphy's portion of the hearing as well because
Uh-huh.
he did a great job, as you saw, of going through how about your posts for this company and this company and this company, and they had added up how many posts she had done for each specific thing and how many of them she had actually disclosed that
Mhm.
she was getting paid by these
Yeah.
companies. And it was across, I think it was like 5 different companies that they brought up. 21% of the time is how often she disclosed that she was getting paid. It should be 100%, obviously. So
Yeah.
1 out of 5 times is all the times that she's disclosing. 4 out of 5 times she's not disclosing. She's making an ad for somebody, but she's not telling you that it's an ad, and that is totally inappropriate. And I believe she's under investigation by the FTC.
Yeah, which is hilarious. Also, one of the companies, that she had endorsed, I forget what it's called, something Harvest, Good Harvest, something.
Something I
Do
have
you
it
remember?
written down somewhere. I'm looking
Anyway,
for it.
it's a company that makes pre-made meal plans, and,
Mm.
they that company owes a ton of money because they made so many people sick with their contaminated food. I'm sorry. It's not funny that people got sick, but it is funny that this woman who's claiming that she's going to make America great, make America healthy again is, you know, public health, it's going well when it's invisible.
Yeah.
When people are healthy, outbreaks are controlled early. I am just deeply, deeply alarmed at not only her approach, this personal, that everything's a personal decision, and that if you were a smart person and you were a good person and you were a morally correct
Right.
person, you would eat well. Because like when you look at her book, I'm like, it just feels like if her mom were alive right now, she would probably make her mom feel like shit. Because
Mhm.
she'd be like, "Well, you should have eaten better when you were younger,
Mhm.
mom."
Mhm.
Like, is that I don't want to believe that that is how she would behave towards her own mother. Um, but like, there's a whole book about it.
Yeah, there's not really
I don't
evidence
know.
that she wouldn't behave that way.
I mean, and it's just we are so obsessed with personal responsibility in this country. It's the great mythology of America that it's like, oh, just one person pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. But it's like there's a whole ecosystem around this. There are many systemic factors that impact who who is plagued by chronic illness, and sometimes you're just unlucky.
Mhm.
And so it makes me really upset to see somebody going into this role who clearly, I mean, one, is totally unqualified to do so. They are not a practicing physician. They are not bringing any sort of clinical expertise. They are bringing a profiteering mindset to the most powerful physician's role in the nation.
Yeah, and we have the previous Surgeon General, who had served under Trump in his first term, has been pretty vocal too about her not being qualified. He had a editorial in Stat, I believe it was, about it. She. I don't think we've ever had a Surgeon General who's not got an active medical license.
I don't think so. Are you talking about Jerome Adams? Did he write it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jerome Adams is an anesthesiologist, by the way.
Yeah. Nice.
He comes and talks at all the anesthesia conferences.
Oh, I'm sure he does. Yeah. Um. Anyway, yeah, no, I agree. She's clearly unqualified, but what really like stood out to me just from the clips that I saw is this is just another loyalist who they're trying.
Oh yeah. Well, I also think that she may have been somebody who, if the administration had been different, would have played it differently.
Yeah,
You know,
I think so too.
um,
I mean, it was very clear she had a script, right? Like this whole because she said multiple times. Oh yeah, that was the other thing that she said over and over and over again. Vaccines save lives. They're like,
yeah,
"Would you recommend the MMR? Vaccines save lives." I'm not asking if vaccines save lives. I'm
yeah,
asking about this specific vaccine.
yeah.
And there wasn't a time, maybe it happened, you saw the whole thing, but in the clips that I saw, I did not see a single time where she said they asked her about a vaccine and she said, "Yes, that particular vaccine is effective." So she was trying to play both sides, right? Because she
She,
knows that she shouldn't sit there and say vaccines are terrible. So she kept repeating this line of vaccines save lives, vaccines save lives. But no, I can't say that one. And no, I can't say that one.
well, and the other thing that I'm deeply curious about, which we will never know, is did she vaccinate her own child against hepatitis B? And I mean, based on the things that she's said publicly, I'm guessing she did not. But, we also had when Trump was in power during COVID, he secretly got
Yeah.
vaccinated, knowing that it would upset his base. And so I am curious if
Yeah.
her child is receiving these vaccines. And of course, if she's actually reading any of the data, which again, I'm a little doubtful based on the things that she said in the book, but I'm open to it. Um, the rational choice is to vaccinate your children.
Yeah.
It is a way to protect your children, and as a new mom, I have thought a lot about her. Not only in this like Maha whatever businesswoman setting, but like she is a postpartum woman being in confirmation hearings in the Senate. I mean, she's still got like the post baby
Mhm,
face. Like
mhm,
she is in a very unique time of her life as a new parent.
mhm,
And so many of the questions that she was asked, not necessarily the financial questions, but the questions about public health, are things that would deeply impact her own
mhm,
child.
mhm,
And so, but we did not see her come out and say whether or not she did that.
mhm,
I don't know if her kid got vitamin K. I'm
mhm,
very curious.
mhm.
Again, I have taken care of children who have, unfortunately had severe strokes because their parents did not believe in vitamin K because of people like RFK and people in the anti-vaccine community who have equated vitamin K with vaccines along with their anti-vaccine rhetoric, and the survival rate from those strokes is very low. Um, and even for kids who do survive, the morbidity is quite high. And I will tell you, if I never have to do, an emergency anesthetic on an infant ever again in my entire life, I would be happy.
Mhm.
And so, for the sake of her child, I hope that her child got vitamin K because I would not wish an infant stroke on any person ever. I just wouldn't.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I do too. I hope actually that her child is getting all the recommendations, not the new ACIP recommendations, but the AAP, Association of American Pediatricians, uh, recommendations for vaccines,
Yeah,
because that's what's evidence-based.
it sure is. It sure is. What a time to be alive, Arghavan.
It sure is a unique point in time. Well, I'm hopeful, Casey Means, terrible candidate, very mismatched for this job. I understood that as of last week, right after the hearing, they didn't have enough votes. I'm hopeful it remains that way.
We will keep a lookout and let all of our listeners know if she gets confirmed.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot of hope, just to be clear, but I
No,
have a
I don't
little bit of
either.
hope.
I don't either. Well, I mean, to be honest, it also was not lost on me watching Cassidy talk to her about vaccination when I'm like, "You got us in this fucking situation, you traitor.
Right. Well, so
You traitor."
that's part of why I do have a tiny bit of hope because I, you know, he voted to confirm RFK Jr. He had made this
He was
deal.
the deciding vote.
Yes. And he had gotten RFK Jr. to make various commitments, all of which he's broken, like not changing ACIP, not changing the childhood vaccination schedule, for example. And so I do just wonder if Cassidy has learned any kind of lesson from that, and whether he, even though he would never say it publicly, whether he regrets having made that decision. I mean, every time RFK Jr. had said some bonkers thing about vaccines, Cassidy has posted on Twitter about like why that's wrong. So I do think he cares to some extent, about children, and he understands how important vaccines are. So is that
But
enough
talk about
to
blowing his opportunity to protect America.
Yes. So
Blew
yeah,
it.
I have wondered, does he regret what he did enough to take a stand now, and make sure that she doesn't get confirmed? I don't know.
I I am very curious. I really am, and I also just don't really trust him to do
Yeah,
the right thing for kids.
yeah.
I don't trust him to do the right thing for America, and, I also worry, right, that, like, compared to RFK, who, like, goes out there is talking about having brain worms and whatever, like, she looks like this moderate whatever, and she's somebody who she can use her white womanhood
Mhm.
to say, like, "Oh, I'm gonna do such a great job," and I don't know. I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Me neither.
Anyway, well, I'll tell you what I need after all of that talk. We spent the first part 1 of this episode talking about violence in Iran. We spent the whole second half talking about the downfall of American public health. Just one more person coming out of the clown car
That's
of
right.
RFK Jr.'s clown car of public health.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you prescribe? So I need a little pick me up now,
Yeah.
Arghavan. Can you amuse me
Yes,
with take two and call me in the morning?
absolutely. So, and people who've listened since the beginning will know that I love Tiny Chef. Tiny Chef is,
Yes.
for those who don't know, a small chef. He's a felted green creature. People are always asking me like, is he a frog? I don't know. He's a chef. I don't know what he is. Don't try to put him in a box. He's a chef. So Tiny Chef um, was nominated for a few Emmys, and they
Oh,
won, I believe, 3 of the 4 that they were nominated for. They won the Outstanding Directing for a Preschool Animated Series award for their Spooky Stump Spectacular. They
Okay.
won the outstanding editing for a preschool animated program for the Spooky Stump Spectacular. And then I believe they also won outstanding preschool animated series. And so that's awesome. Folks
Wow.
may recall that the show was canceled, unfortunately. So this is,
Oh, I did not know that.
yeah, that's how I became aware of Tiny Chef in the first place, was when the show was canceled and the brilliant people who create Tiny Chef and the whole Tiny Chef universe had posted a video of him receiving the news of the cancellation. And it was very upsetting to Chef.
Oh.
Uh,
Oh.
and it was just such a beautifully made video. And I think they gained tons of fans, myself being one of them. Anyway, so they won a few Emmys, which is great, although bittersweet because the show's been canceled. And I saw a video they posted, which is probably an older video, but of Chef dancing. So Chef loves to dance, and this one is he's dancing to this aerobics video. So it's like if you think back to like the 80s and 90s aerobics videos, there's women in these leotards, yeah, and he's like
Like jazzercise?
kind of, and he's like doing the moves. It's really, really cute. I love it when Chef dances. So I'm
Okay.
gonna put a link to that video for folks to watch. Um, and what was the other thing? Oh, and then also Chef had like a little acceptance speech. And he, of course, being how he is, he forgot to take his notes up to the microphone to accept his Emmy in the imaginary world of Chef, because obviously it's real people who won the actual awards. But anyway, it's very cute. So if you want something a little lighthearted and whimsical, I definitely recommend watching some of these little snippets. So I'll put a couple clips in the show notes. How about you? What do you recommend for
Excellent.
folks?
So, as folks on the pod know, I am an anesthesiologist. I give drugs to children for my job. It's wonderful. And I came across a video of a physician. I think he's an ER physician. Um, having a video taken of himself being anesthetized
Mm.
with propofol, and it was it's I mean, I know how quickly I can have somebody go to sleep. Um, but it was fascinating because it was just way faster than he thought it was gonna be, which was interesting. And I always think it's funny when patients are like, "I'm gonna fight it. I'm gonna fight it." And I'm like, "Go ahead. You do whatever you wanna do. I'm just gonna keep doing my job." And I always win. That's what I do. I'm a winner, and I always win. Maybe propofol's the winner. But anyway, I will
You
pop
have the tools.
I have the tools. I will, and I always do it in, of course, in a safe way with airway equipment available, monitoring to make sure my patients are safe. So I will put a link to that in the show notes. And then the other videos that have been, I just find them very amusing, is for anybody who has ever had an MRI done. The machine, it's a giant magnet. It's in that donut thing. There's like a tube that you go in and out of, and the magnet. There's a noise that happens that's very rhythmic when the MRI is running. It makes different noises and like at a different rate, I guess, a different percussive sound, depending on what kind of MRI is being done, what organ are they looking at, how many slices does it need. So it'll change what the speed is of that beeping noise. And so I have seen a number of videos on TikTok that I find very funny where it says waiting for the beat to drop in MRI. And there's somebody who works in an MRI who is recording themselves with the MRI machine in the background, and you can hear the noise. And the one that I'll put a link to in the show notes, it's Shania Twain's I Feel Like a Woman. And
I saw that one, and I
have
was
you
like,
seen that one?
I almost wanted to ask the guy, like, what sequence is that? Because it's usually
Yeah.
people who've had an MRI, like, it's not usually a consistent sound. It'll be like staccato, and then there'll be a long, and then a short. Like it's not any sort of regularity. And the sound that he found in that sequence was like do 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 do
Yep.
do
Yep.
do just over and over
And
again. I
it's
was like, what is that?
and it's possible that he edited it to make that sound. I don't think so based on the audio quality, but I'm open to that being a possibility. But I will say, people who don't know this, as a pediatric anesthesiologist, I spend many hours almost every week in MRI because it's one of the main out of OR places where we provide anesthesia to kids, because it's hard for adults to get MRIs. It's really hard to keep a kid still, for a long scan. And so I have heard many different beats dropped in MRI, and I don't recall ever hearing that specific one, but I am tempted the next time I'm in MRI to play it for my colleagues, my rad tech colleagues who have so much knowledge, and I am very curious what they think.
Yeah.
And I will, if I can find out some details, I'll report back.
Thank you. I would love to hear. Yeah, those are hilarious. I only saw that one, so I'm glad to hear there's more.
I'll try to see if I can pull some other ones, because I've seen several songs and I'm amused.
Maybe they will show up on my FYP. Who knows? Anyway. Okay, well, I think that's it. Is that it for this week's episode?
That's it.
All right. Well, if you didn't like what you heard, this has been the America First with Nicholas J. Fuentes podcast. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to The Present Illness. Please leave us a review or a rating, and tell folks to check us out.
We know that people who listen to this pod are not into Nick Fuentes, so I feel confident. Since you hung out with us this long, you like us. So you should go ahead and subscribe to The Present Illness. Leave us a review. We are on TikTok, Instagram, we are on YouTube, and you can stay on top of all of our TPI-related news.
And we will, of course, be back next week with more headlines, hot takes, and doom scrolling, wrapped in some laughs.
Until then, agitate, hydrate, and take a nap. See you next time on The Present Illness. Production by Arghavan, Salles, and Alyssa Burgart. Editing by Alyssa Burgart. Social media by Arghavan, Salles. Original music by Joseph Apoff. Don't take medical advice from random people on a podcast. This show's for informational purposes. It's meant to be fun, and it's certainly not medical advice. Please take your medical questions to a qualified professional. And I know that we brought this up earlier in the show. Just an additional disclaimer, none of our opinions are representative of Stanford University.